Good morning, students. This is your Shanghita ma'am, and today we will learn how to write a short story. But before that, we will listen to a story. The name of the story that I will tell you today is The Ant and the Grasshopper. I think you have heard the story many times. Still, I want all of you to enjoy the story with me today. So let's start the story. On the land, once upon a time, there lived an ant and a grasshopper in a grassy meadow by the river. It was during the hot summer season when the ant was working very hard by collecting wheat grains from the farmer's field. The ant would work very hard all day long, from dawn till dusk, collecting the heavy grain well balanced on her back. She would then put the wheat grain in her storage, where she used to keep her food. So, she was keeping all the wheat grains in her larder. What is a larder? A larder means a room for storing food. She used to keep all the wheat grains in her larder carefully and rush back to the field to collect another grain. She would then come back and forth between the field and her larder, often doing this task the whole day. So, this was a very hard and laborious task. On the other hand, there was a grasshopper in the grassy meadow who would spend all his time in singing and dancing. He would then often tell the ant that you shouldn't work so hard the entire day in collecting the grains. He would frequently call the ant to join him in singing and dancing and making merry of the present time, just like the grasshopper. However, the ant would ignore him and continue with her work. This would make the grasshopper laugh even louder, and he would often ridicule the ant, stating that they have enough food to sustain themselves in summer. Hearing this, the ant said that she was saving some food for the cold season, and she also told the grasshopper to follow the same thing. The grasshopper didn't pay any attention to her words and continued singing and dancing merrily. Soon the summer is gone, then came the autumn, and after that came the winter season. It became freezing cold outside due to snowfall. So there was snowfall everywhere, and the sun was barely visible, and the nights were long and dark. So out of cold, the grasshopper lost his interest in singing and making merry. He was cold and hungry and had no place to take shelter from the snow outside. He wondered how to save himself from this tough situation. Suddenly he remembered about the ant and visited for some food and shelter. Off he went to her place and knocked at her doorstep for help. When she opened the door, the grasshopper offered to sing for her in return for some food and shelter. To this, the ant replied that she had toiled hard, she had worked very hard in summer to save enough food for winter, and the grasshopper had mocked her then. She gently asked him to sing somewhere else and earn his food and shelter. It is then the grasshopper realized that he would have saved enough food for the winter instead of wasting his time being lazy during the summer in singing and dancing around. So, what do you learn from the story? The moral of the story is make hay while the sun shines. It means that the ant and the grasshopper full story teaches us that one must make the best use of the present situation instead of suffering later. The theme of the story is that we need to plan for the future, and for that we should start working today to reap the benefits tomorrow. In the ant and the grasshopper story in English, the grasshopper keeps wasting his time without wondering how he would sustain in winter, how he would survive in winter without food. On the other hand, the ant works hard during the summer to get shelter and store enough food for the winter without making any merry in the summertime. The grasshopper faces the harsh reality and learns the lesson in a hard way. So I think, students, you have heard the story many times and still you enjoy reading these stories again and again, as these stories are inspiring, interesting, and gives an important moral value to us. So these are the qualities of a good short story. So in our lesson today, we will learn how to write a good short story. So story writing is an art. It is a work of imagination that is written in easily understandable way. A short story is meant to be read in a single sitting. That means you should be able to read a short story within a little time. So it should be as direct and brief as possible. The things that you must remember to write a good short story is as follows. There must be a title to the story. It is very important. There must be a title to the story. Without title, you should not be writing a story. The title of the story must be interesting and it should make you curious to read the story. Next, the story should have a beginning, middle, and an end. A story becomes interesting when it creates interest among readers. In the story must be planned. There must be planned and logical series of events. The events which are not at all related to the story should not be mentioned in your writing. And always remember to abide by the word limit that generally is mentioned in the question paper only. Generally, the word limit is 120 words to 150 words generally. Okay? The story must be written sequentially. Means the events should be written in a correct sequence. Some stories have a moral or a message. So if there is a moral, it must be mentioned at the end of the story. Like you have read in the grasshopper and the ant story, the moral I have mentioned already. Make hay while the sun shines. It is the moral. So this moral must be mentioned at the end of the story. Some stories do not have any particular message. So you can end those stories with a usual or unusual ending, or with a suspense. Some stories are adventurous, some are funny, some are scary. So there must be a starting point to the story which moves through different events to at the end to an ending point. Okay? Then comes the characters. The depiction of the characters must be interesting and convincing. Your story can have people, animals, or any other creatures as your characters. You can put any other creatures as your characters in the story. But build the characters of your story in such a way that the reader feels pain when your characters are in pain. They feel happiness when your characters are happy. You can add dialogues to add more details to the characters. But do not write too much of dialogues in the story, as it can sometimes lengthen the story. Plot of the story should be interesting but short, because the word limit should not be exceeded, that I have mentioned earlier also. Sometimes the outline of a story will be given to you, and you have to develop the story on the basis of the input or the outlines given. What is the outline of the story? The small points will be given, and you have to develop the small points into a story. You can see it. The outline of the story in short is given. You have to develop these points into a short story in your own language, in your own words. So now let's talk about the setting of the story. The story can happen in a forest. It can happen in a classroom. It can also happen in a totally imaginary place like a fairyland, like a toyland, etc. So you need to develop your story according to the setting or the background of the story. Suppose in the outline of the story, I have already mentioned what is an outline. So suppose in the outline of the story, the background is the classroom. So you have to write your story in accordance to the classroom only. You cannot place your story in the forest at that time. Okay? So read the outline of the story properly and then develop the story on your own, taking help from the outline. Try to write your story in a simple language using past tense generally. But when you are writing dialogues that need to be written in present tense, so always keep that in mind. So the story should be short and simple, and it should be having a few characters. That should have a good beginning. A story should have a good beginning and an proper ending. So these are some tips to remember. Focus should be on a single incident. You should not write more than 2 or 3 incidents. Your focus should be on a single incident. If you write more than 2 or 3 incidents, then it will be complicated. Okay? There is no need to write any complicated story. The story should be written in past tense. The story should revolve around the central character. If you are giving any climax to the story, it should be clear and thrilling. Stick to the word limit, I have told you, and always write a title, give a title, proper title to the story. And if there is a moral, write down the moral at the end of your story. So these are the important points of story writing that I have discussed with you today. I hope you have understood and you have enjoyed it. Thank you, students.